Well, good afternoon, everyone. We're about at 11:16, so we'll go ahead and begin. And I'm going to turn the meeting over to Craig Levins from Broward College and let him introduce himself and his presentation.
Okay, let me just share my screen here. Okay, and are you all viewing a blank blue screen at this point? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. All right, there we go. So thank you, everyone, and welcome. First of all, Drew, another amazing conference that we're all experiencing today, and I've been enjoying all the sessions that I've been going through. Today we're going to be talking about the social model of disability. My name is Craig Levins. I know a lot of people in this room from over the years, and very excited to be able to present here today. So thank you to Drew and Janice for giving me this opportunity. Just a brief background of myself. I've been with Broward College since 2017. In that role, I oversee the Accessibility Resources Department, our Electronic Information Technology and Assistive Technology Department, our Deaf Services, our College Preparation Transition Deferment Program, and of course, most recently, the Seahawk Nest program, which is our CTP program, which is currently under development. So that one I consider my baby. And I've been working on that one really since I've been at Broward College, and it's been a long haul, and I'm very excited to get it going. Not that anything has gotten in the way of it going as it should have or anything, but I know you can all relate to that. I also teach. I teach at Broward College in the BC Online department in the psychology department, and I'm the president-elect of Florida Ahead. So just really quickly about that, if you're not a member, we would love to have you. Please let us know. We have some great stuff going on with that, and it's very affordable. So please reach out to me if you're not a member and would like to be. Prior to me coming to Florida, I was with the State University of New York, and I was with them for about 20 years. Doing similar stuff that I'm doing here. So enough about me. Before we get started, I would like to do an icebreaker. Okay, and this icebreaker is very easy. So if you could all just unmute yourselves for a moment. Okay, and let me all know that you're there. Just say hello.
Hello.
So I can hear everyone.
Hello.
Okay.
Hi.
And last I checked, we had about 20 people.
Hello.
So hello. 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 Last I checked, we had about. The last I checked, we had about 20 people. So this shouldn't be too difficult of a task. All I want to do is count to 10. Okay. And so what I'm asking you to do is just start counting. But if somebody says the same number twice, we need to go back to number 1. So go ahead and start.
1.
Oh,
One,
okay,
two,
wait, we gotta start over. Okay, only one at a time.
1, 2, 3, 4,
Wait,
5,
stop. You can only say what? Wait, you can only stop. You can only say, you can only,
3,
whoever that is, please stop. Let me clarify. You can only say a number once and not back to back. Okay, so one person say 1, one person say 2. Don't just count straight down, and we'll see if we can get through this. If you say 1, you can't say 3, but you got to wait for 2. So we'll start over.
1,
2,
3,
4, 5,
6.
Oh, start over.
1,
2, 3, 4,
1,
2,
3,
4.
Oh, we stopped at 4. Okay, we can stop there. All right, just a fun little way to get us up, get us awake after sitting through a couple sessions. You know, but what does this show us a little bit? It shows us the difficulty of the online environment. Now, if everyone could go back on mute, that would be great. We'll make sure that happens before we go on. So really, that was just a fun little icebreaker. But I do like to use that. I've used it a few times, and quite often I try to bring that into a discussion on just some of the difficulties we have in a virtual environment, right? And especially if we have people who are new to our environment, which I know in our case, as we're doing our recruiting, certainly will be the case. All right, so thank you for indulging me in a little bit of fun this morning, and for letting me know you can all count to 10. That's a good way to start. So I would like to start the presentation with a discussion. So I would like to hear from all of you. If you could define the following in the context of an FPCTP program. So we all know what access, equity, and inclusion are, but when we're looking at access, equity, and inclusion from our programs, what does this mean? So the way I have my screen set up, I will not be able to see people raising their hands. So please feel free just to jump in and start talking and help out here. And before we get this conversation going, I do just want to share that, as I said, the program at Broward College is pretty new, as I said. And so it really will be helpful for me to get a lot of feedback here, and I think it'll be helpful for everyone in the group to get a lot of feedback. I know some of you have been to presentations that I've done before, and really this is the way I like to do things. If we only get through 1 or 2 slides, I'm going to get all the information out to you through conversation anyway. So really, I want this to be an interactive process. I certainly don't consider myself the expert in all of these areas. These are areas that I have presented on, but really I want to garner what you all have, and it's only going to improve the presentation. So to start with, what is access, equity, and inclusion in your eyes when it comes specifically to the programs we're talking about today?
I'll start, Craig. This is
Thanks.
Kathy.
Thanks, Kathy.
I would say access, equity, inclusion for these programs, inclusive post-secondary ed programs, is providing support to students with intellectual disabilities that enables them to access the content in the coursework and to access their peers and to access their community in the colleges in which they are enrolled to succeed in their goals.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, let me ask this specific question. Okay, so when we look at equity at an institution, and you know, we all work in an area where equity is extremely important and something we all focus on. Can we achieve equity for the students that we work with in these programs? Is this something that is attainable? And if it is, how is it attainable?
It depends on your goal for equity. If your goal is social, academic, community, so it really, people have to dig down deep and see what is their goal for equity. If it is content, then I don't know if we can do that, but I think it's worth a try. And it's providing support to students that may not go to all students, but it is that support that enables them to understand,
right,
to the level that they can.
And that is excellent feedback. Thank you so much, Kathy. And I agree with you. You know, when we were developing our program, we talked a whole lot about this. You know, I really love the theory behind accessibility in general. And of course, one of the things that we talk about all the time is equity. And the idea is, you know, our vision is seamless access and an equitable opportunity for all students to succeed. So where the conversation really left us is, you know, we think we can provide an equitable opportunity at success. because the success that we are measuring is that academic credential that we all develop. Okay, so one of the differences between equality and equity is we're really not measuring the same things all the time in the same way. So I believe we can provide an equitable opportunity for success in that context within these programs. So in the same way that a student outside of our programs, we want to ensure an equitable opportunity for success for an associate's degree, a bachelor's degree, a certificate, we can provide that same level of equity within these programs. And then as far as inclusion is concerned, this is the other really big piece that we're going to be talking about today. So I'd love a little bit of feedback before we move on here as well. And really, what does inclusion mean? And again, we talked a lot about this at Broward College. And when I was preparing for this session and talking with Drew and Janice, we talked about this quite a bit as well. What does inclusion really mean in your program? When you look at your students in your program being inclusive, how do you define that? I'd love to get a couple of responses on that before we get into the heart of this presentation. Any thoughts? Okay, well, certainly I know when we look at inclusion in our program, right, our minimum is 50%. And to be honest, when we developed our proposal for this program, what we did is we made sure we met that 50%, but with the idea that we wanted to go well beyond that. And I know in talking with other programs around the state who assisted us in our process, that really was the goal as well. And the programs that we visited, we saw that as well. So really the idea, as I see it, is semester after semester, year after year, an incredible goal is to increase that inclusion. And we'll be talking a lot about this today. And seeing how we can increase that inclusion, because it doesn't only impact our students, it doesn't only impact our program, but it has a great benefit, I believe, on the institution as a whole, the faculty and staff as a whole, and the students outside of the program as a whole. Okay, so I'm curious, how many people have worked within the social model or have at least heard about the paradigm shift from the medical model to the social model? Okay, so this in the area of accessibility has been something that's been around for a while. And I thought it would be a great idea to bring it in the context of these programs. So really what we're talking about when we are talking about a transition from a medical model to a social model, I'm going to pull away for a moment from specific programs that work with students with unique abilities and just talk about accessibility as a whole. When I started in this field almost 25 years ago, we definitely were entrenched in a medical model. When I started at my first institution up at SUNY, really my job started from the admissions process. I would be invited to look at students' applications and say, this person has a disability, do you think they can make it here? And if I made the determination that, yeah, I think they probably can make it here, then that student was pretty much assigned to me to do almost everything for that student. I was their academic advisor. I worked with them individually. And the idea was, how can we get this student through? And that was really the context of the institution. It was very entrenched in paperwork. We would talk with students and say, we need paperwork. We need to make sure you have a clear diagnosis, that it shows what accommodations you need. Can't be any more than 3 years old, your paperwork. If it's 3 years and 1 month, you're not going to get your accommodations. doesn't matter that you've had a learning disability your entire life, or were diagnosed with ADHD at the age of 5 and have had an IEP throughout your entire high school. We have to have this paperwork, and it has to be current. The thing we used to like to say is somebody could walk into our office with no arms and say, I need I need some assistance. And we would say, well, we need some paperwork to prove that you need it. So very much looking at students as a patient, and the issue is the individual. Really what we like to look at now is the issue is not with the individual. The issue is with the environment. It's with our institutions. It's our institutions that create the disabling world, not the individuals. And a great example of this simply are ramps. We can go back to really the first aid that assisted students in higher education was access into buildings. It wasn't an individual's fault that they couldn't get into a building if a ramp wasn't there. That was the institution. And once the institution built the ramps and students could get in, it was very clear that these students were provided an equitable opportunity, and they succeeded just as much as everyone. And that's really what we're talking about with this paradigm. Is continually moving towards this social model, which originally was called social justice model, but has evolved to social model, just as a piece of information. And while we are continually changing, this social model, it continues to be needed. And this is what I'm proposing for your institutions and for your programs, is something that should be identified as a culture change. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But if we look at especially what's happened since the pandemic has hit, we really see how important this is. Suddenly we had things set up pretty well in our traditional environments, and everything went online. And were we ready for students? No, we weren't ready for the transition. Were we ready for students who received accommodations? We really weren't ready in a lot of cases there. And in a lot of cases, we still aren't ready. And again, it goes back to, this is not an issue for the student. This is an issue for the institution. So we've been in this paradigm shift throughout the country. I would say throughout the last 20 years, probably was more identifiable in the last 7 or 8 years, and we've aggressively been moving forward. And when you look at our international affiliate, AHEAD, Association for Higher Education and Disability, what you see today are a lot of education surrounding this. The guidelines that they use for documentation today come directly out of this paradigm shift. When we look at the ADA amendment and we talk about breaking down barriers, that piece of legislation was incredibly important in this paradigm shift. It gave us the ability to say, okay, you don't have paperwork that's 3 years old, but you know what, who cares? It's 4 years, it's 5 years old. It's obvious you've had these accommodations. So we can move forward with you. And in fact, maybe you don't have paperwork. I've been working in this field for 25 years, and I feel pretty confident in my abilities to sit down with an individual who maybe hasn't been to school for a while, but clearly expresses the barriers that they have, that yeah, maybe I can approve you for extended time on an exam in a reduced distraction location, because it's clear to me that this is something that will assist you and that the disability is there. So these were all new concepts 7-8 years ago that really are driving accessibility forward in all of our institutions, and I believe can drive our own the programs that we're talking about within this institute forward as well. So again, the key concepts here is the issue is the institution. We are driving towards inclusion. You look at what Senator and Ms. Gardner talked about yesterday, 2 days ago now, in their keynote, and that's really what we're talking about. Just it doesn't matter the way things have been done. It's not the way things should have been done, and we need to move them forward. The last real important piece about this is the shared responsibility framework. And, this is something that I think can really drive inclusion forward for our programs. One of the things I noticed across the state is really how involved, our program staffs are with our students, as they well should be. But also just ensuring that, when a student needs advisement, let's get the academic advisement office involved. Let's make sure that there are academic advisors that work with the students in our program so they get an experience that students from outside of our programs get. And not only will that benefit, again, and I'm going to keep going back to this, not only does this benefit our students, but this benefits the staff. It benefits the advisors, because they don't have the opportunity often to work with students with unique abilities. And when they do, the light bulb goes off, just like it has for all of us at one point when they say, wow, these students really can succeed here. Then as they meet families moving forward, because we all know more and more students are coming into our institutions, whether it's through our programs or not, with unique abilities, and they'll be ready, and they can be the champions for us. They can be allies for us, and they can drive their own departments forward, and be prepared to work with students from a proactive state. So that shared responsibility framework is very important. And when we start talking about, how we can promote culture change, we're going to continually go back to that, because we are not we're not academic advisor experts. We're not content experts, but we work amongst all of them. So part of our jobs, I see, is giving them the tools to work with all students. So again, I'd like to throw this back to a discussion. And to the right of your screen here, it's just sort of a reminder of what we talked about. And I touched upon these questions already, but I would like to hear, some ideas from all of you. How can the social model improve access to your program and create equity? And also, how can you use shared responsibility approach to increase inclusion for the students in your program throughout the institution? Any thoughts around this?
Craig, we had someone post that folks are having trouble unmuting themselves. I'm not sure what that.
I'm able to. I did just want to tell you, Craig, we don't see anything. We just see you. We don't see your screen. So if you think you're sharing your screen, you're not.
I see his screen. Do other people not see Craig's screen? I see it.
I can see his screen.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
That
pinned it
happened to
then.
me yesterday. You have to leave and come back,
Yeah,
but it just happens to random people.
yeah.
Thanks, Kelly, for that.
Sorry about that.
Okay. My heart dropped a little bit there.
If anyone's unable to unmute themselves and they would like to, please just put something in the chat box and I'll unmute you for the discussion.
And Drew, the way that I have my screen set up, I'm not able to see the chat box directly. So if you'd be able to relay any questions or comments to me, I'd really appreciate it.
We do have one question that came in earlier. It says, do you mean that 50% of the time the students are in inclusive activities, or do you mean that 50% of any class is inclusive?
So the way that we built the grant was 50% inclusion overall. I shouldn't say the way we built the grant, but that was the baseline that we were working from. We tried to set the goal much higher than that right from the beginning, and I think the idea that I was trying to get at is that we want to continually raise that bar. When we created the team to develop our grant, we had that directly in mind, and we want the inclusion piece. We take that piece very seriously, and we want to get as high as we can with that inclusion piece. So I mentioned the 50% just as a baseline, but certainly we are aiming much higher than that.
So Craig, I have, I don't know if it's a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can be.
So maybe it's a struggle or a challenge for me. So maybe let me state it that way because I think that's how I'm feeling it right now. I think when we think of inclusion and when we think of social model and we want people like the example you gave of a student needing academic advisement, then we send them to the academic center. They need career advisement, we send them. The issue, I think, is the fact that many of those people are actually untrained and they are unaware of things. So the first thing they see when a student comes over to them is actually the limitation without them understanding the environmental factor. And someone said the biggest discrimination we face is the attitudinal. That is the one we cannot change. So when a student walks into an office and the first thing they see is the look on the person who is supposed to help them, and that look is, why are you here? Kind of a deal. People kind of shut off. So how do we begin to either educate or, I don't know, for people to really understand that when we talk about a social model, it's not something that the disability office or the type of program that we are working with right now, it's not just their sole responsibility, it's the responsibility of the institution as a whole.
Absolutely, and I agree with everything as usual, B, that that you're saying, and one that goes back to the shared responsibility piece of the social model. But really, I think what you're talking about is the culture change that needs to happen on the institutions. And a big piece of that culture change is exactly what you're talking about in training people for exactly those reasons. And I'll get a lot more into culture change, but I'll just use a quick example. When I first started at Broward College, I was in my office. At the time, right now I don't work directly with students for accommodations purposes, but I did when I got here. And literally one of the first students I met was someone who walked in and said, I need advisement. I said I had a disability and they sent me down here. And right away I knew the uphill battle that I had, right?
Yes, that's it.
Yes, yeah, and and at Broward College now, and we'll be talking about, as I said, culture change shortly, but at Broward College now, we are at a point where that just never happens anymore, and it was exactly because what you're talking about. It's the continual training, more than the continual training. It's it's the buy-in from the deans of student services to ensure that continual training happens. And there's a whole lot of other factors in there, but that absolutely is a key component of the culture change, is making sure that people have the skills that they need to work with students. And part of those skills is exactly that. When someone walks in, you don't just shut down. And part of that falls on, I wouldn't say the CTP programs, but on the accessibility office to be training that the staff. So a lot more to talk about that in the next slide or two. So if we can hold off a little bit on going a little deeper into that, and I know you've done a lot of work around there, B. So if while we're talking about that, if you can jump in, that would be great.
Craig, I would also agree with B in the sense that, when you asked about how do you define inclusion, that, part of my answer is belonging. And if those students belong to the institution, not just the CTP program or whatever it is, but the institution, then there is that culture shift, if you will. And the other piece of it is in in education, particularly students with intellectual disabilities. One of the things that we've done in trying to understand this social model is to talk about the fit between the environment and the support needs of the student. that is in effect that social model, and that it is the environment that needs to provide the supports for that student. And even when we're talking students with intellectual disabilities, we are often, and this is a difficult one for higher ed, talking about compensatory strategies. And I think that gets back into some of the issues you talked about with, do you have the documentation that shows you're ready, et cetera. But it is those compensatory strategies. I think the question to me is, what's the outcome we're looking for? And if it's for students to be successful in their career, then we can provide them. But that is a very difficult issue for higher ed. And I think, as you probably already know, being a part of AHEAD a number of years ago when we were there and giving presentations, there was quite a bit of anger at students with intellectual disabilities being expected to be supported by disability services offices.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. Yeah, and I think that still exists in some cases, Kathy. You know, and you know, another piece here is I think what everyone in this room needs, you probably already realize this, but need to be acknowledged that on your campuses, you are the experts when it comes to working with students with intellectual disabilities. And you know, I know at Broward College, you know, we have at this point, over 60, probably closer to 70 students who are registered not within a CTP program, but are registered within the college, who have an intellectual disability. So, you know, the education piece outside of our programs becomes very, very important, because really there may not be anybody else on the campus to be able to provide that education. And what we see a lot within accessibility is stuff falls on us, you know, and whether it's right or whether it's not, you know, you may be the only person on your campus who can provide some of the skills that these offices need. You know, because these inclusion, you know, when we talk about inclusion for students, there are students, at least for many of our colleges outside of the programs, who are on our campuses, and that inclusion just isn't happening. So I'm getting away a little bit, because I always get inspired by Kathy when she talks and brings all these new ideas. But thank you, Kathy. So anybody else, and any ideas here on how the social model can improve access to your program, or how the shared responsibility approach can increase inclusion? Okay, no one else? I mean, we covered it a bit, and we can move on. Okay. All right, so so really, here's a basic guideline for cultural change, you know, and as you're reading through this, and as we're talking about this, for feedback, I would like to hear what you think might be missing as we're going through, because this is not completely comprehensive. If this was comprehensive, there would be about 20 or 30 bullet points here. But these are the basics, and you know, I've gone through quite a few culture changes in my time. And I will have to tell you, if you haven't driven culture change on your campus, when you do it, it's extremely personally rewarding once it starts working. So, you know, the first thing I think that really needs to happen is you need to define what you want to change. Okay, so we're talking about increasing access, equity, and inclusion here, but using that as sort of what you want to change in culture is it's a very big, broad topic. So I would suggest, you know, on your campuses, if this is something you want to move forward with, is really using that paradigm shift that I talked about, because that's something that people can really clearly identify with. The graphic that I use there, I think is pretty simple. It shows people, you know, what used to happen, what needs to happen. It can show how we're on the way. It allows people to say, wow, I kind of already do a little bit of this. And it's much more clearly defined than increasing access, equity, inclusion. But the end goal of moving towards that social model is increasing those three areas. So really, the first piece here is making that that definition. operationally defining what we're talking about is just important. Identifying who can assist you with driving that change is really important. You know, we are all in situations where maybe we can't drive culture change on our own. So we do need people from the top to assist us here. You know, as you move down here, you see that we also need allies to actually get the work done. But sometimes we really need that push from the top. And I'll use a couple, or I'll use one example here. Around our EIT initiatives at the college. So I'll go out of this particular culture change because this was pretty dramatic. One of the things that I also recognized when I came to Broward is that our electronic information was not accessible at all. There were no initiatives around that. And this was at a time where Florida was getting bombarded along with New York, you know, for websites not being accessible, for electronic information not being accessible. And so what I tried to do is create a cross-functional consortium across the college. And I set a meeting. And I got about 50% attendance, and they were all delegates. So I was reaching out to department heads, to deans, and really nobody took it seriously. So I went to my supervisor and I'm like, I want to talk to the president about this because I think this is something that legally is really a problem. And I got in with the president, and the president said, use my name. Okay. Sent an email to the same people, and every single department head, every single AVP, every single dean that got invited was at that meeting because it came from the president. It no longer came from me. And now that became the beginning of that culture change. And so that's what we need sometimes, you know, is if we're trying to make a major change, we may need help from the top. Now, when we're talking about, you know, a paradigm shift as we are here from the social model, we probably don't need to go directly to the president, but finding those deans that are allies and the people that you work with is just extremely, extremely important to be able to move these initiatives forward. We also need to be prepared to acknowledge and empathize with others that may not accept the change. And they probably have a good reason, you know, and I'll use faculty as an example here. Faculty are overwhelmed, you know, and especially since everything's gone virtual, we all know, we've all had examples, I'm sure, of faculty who just really struggled with the technology, and it really impacted their ability to teach. And we add one more thing to them, and you know, the barriers come up, you know, and we need to empathize with them. You know, one of the ways you really can get allies is say, I get it, you know, and ensure them that, you know, there are going to be resources there to assist them. There are going to be people there to assist them. I'll use another example around the EIT stuff from my last institution. When we made the determination that all PDFs would have to be remediated to be accessible, I got thrown in front of faculty senate, and I was basically torn apart, you know, and I was kind of expecting that, you know, because it had happened to me previously. And really all I tried to do is say, I agree with everyone. You know, it's awful that this is coming down to you. But what I'm saying is we're putting things in place where you don't actually have to do the work. You know, we have people who can get you where you need to be. All I'm asking from you is buy-in from you and support from you, and, you know, and provide your documents to us so we can fix them for you. Then we'll provide the tools for you. So as you're creating them forward, we don't have to do this again. And I had individuals calling me, you know, left and right. And that's just what I kept saying. You know, it's like, this should have been done years ago. It's not your fault. It's not my fault. Let's work on it together. And ultimately what this will do is it'll improve your course, and it'll provide access to all of your students, which I know you want, right? And how do they say no at that point, right? So it's really empathizing with people, understanding people are overworked. And we see the value in it, you know, because we're in it every single day, and it does take a little bit of legwork to make sure that others see the value in it as well. And once we get there, we get buy-in. You know, it's a real important piece to that culture change is getting that buy-in. You know, and to piggyback on that, emphasizing why the change must happen. All right, so we always have the legal card in our back pocket, right? We know why a lot of this stuff has to happen, but that's not really why this should be happening, right? It should be happening because it's the right thing to do. You know, we've all seen students with intellectual disabilities thrive, you know, and I'll be the first to admit, you know, 15 years ago, I probably would have said, you know, how could they ever attend college? You know, and I probably even used the word they, and I'm ashamed that I was at that point. But other people are at that point right now, and so we need to emphasize that, and we need to focus on how this will impact students. Focus on, you know, how students being in an inclusive environment will help other students. And not only will it help other students because diversity is a wonderful thing and it enriches our lives, but as students who don't have intellectual disabilities are able to work with students who do have intellectual disabilities, we know how that rolls forward, right? It's only going to assist the whole movement in getting to these inclusive environments. So having that emphasis is very, very important. And then, of course, our allies, right? You know, getting back to what B was talking about with the training. Training is a crucial component to this. You know, once you identify what you need to do, you know, the training has to happen, and identifying those allies within those trainings is a key component here. Every time that I have professional development opportunities at my college, I look for the people in the audience who I can tell are really engaged. And I'll go up to them after if they don't come up to me, and I'll say, well, what did you think? You know, and you get those people say, this just spoke so much to me. We need this. Like, I've been waiting for this. That's the person you want as an ally. You know, that is the person that, you know, after you do some training, some professional development, and you want to create maybe a committee to assist you, those are the people you want on that committee because it speaks to them personally. I remember early on when I was presenting this paradigm shift, I was in a parking lot about a week later, just ready to go home. And an academic advisor came up to me and called. He's like, Craig goes, I can't thank you enough for you know, that presentation. I've already been using the skills that you've been talking about. I'm able to identify with students a lot better. That person is now not only one of my best allies, but one of my best friends, you know, not just best professional colleagues, because they drive this forward much more than I do at this time. You know, they're there with other advisors. When new advisors come in, they're in there and saying, you know, when you work with students, you know, make sure you ask every student, you know, have you ever received any accommodations that you would like to share with me? You know, don't just say it to some students because you know, say it to everyone. Make sure you let everybody know the opportunities that are out there. And so these are the allies really that we need. And then we need to be relentless, okay? And this is really where the training comes in, you know? So you want to develop professional opportunity after professional opportunity after professional opportunity. If you have a good center for teaching and learning, and you have the ability to provide virtual trainings where people can go at their own pace, this is an area you want to take advantage of that. And I'll say, for me and all of my team members, every single training we do, regardless of the topic, the first or second slide is that graphic of the social model, and talking about the paradigm shift we've gone through and are continuing to go through. And people know about it now. You know, it's language at our college that we are in the social policy, and that's what tells me that culture change has happened there. And so it's on people's mind. And you know, I keep going back to EIT because we've had a huge culture change in EIT at Broward College as well. But things are happening now, and this is why I said it's personally satisfying. You know, we get emails, and I never forget the first email that I got and said, Craig, I reached out to marketing and I asked them to post this flyer and they refused to because it wasn't accessible. Now, I never worked directly with marketing, but basically what they were saying is what we had been talking about over and over and over again. And that shows that the culture change is there. And now I work with marketing all the time, and we're on the same page, and we were seeing this on our campus with Universal Design for Learning, and other things that we're talking about here. And that's what happens when we continually move our culture change forward. And then, of course, feedback. We need feedback from people. My recommendation is as you go out and you talk with groups, always have a quick survey ready with key questions, asking how you did, what if the message came through. What we like to do now, because we've been a few years along in our culture change with the paradigm shift, is we ask, are you more aware of now than you were a year ago of this paradigm shift, and questions like that, just so we can continually tie this in together. So those are some of the basics of what I see as culture change. Any questions on this? Any comments on this? Okay, and what I would like to ask is if you've been a part of culture change on your campuses, whether you've led it, have been a part of it, and if you have any examples that you can share to help drive this home to the other participants in the room.
Craig, I just want to say thank you. I mean, this is great. And you're right. Sometimes we are leading cultural change without knowing it. Until when we arrive, then we look back. But one thing that I have found to be helpful is when we catch ourselves making mistakes, that we can embrace it and share it willingly. Because there are times that we use languages that are maybe not inclusive. And when we catch ourselves to say, you see, I just made that error. This is a journey. We are all together. We don't have it yet, but we will continue to help. So I think at times when people see you or hear you accept something or acknowledge where you are, I think it helps. So people don't feel like, oh, if I do this, then, heaven is going to rain down on me and
Yes.
kind of.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's crucially important when we talk about anything in our areas in a group, that we create a safe space, and we talk about what a safe space means, and we talk about up front, listen, if you say something that, maybe is not the right way to say something, that's okay, because we want people to share that, because, in my experience, almost all the people we work with want to do a good job. They want this work to go forward, but they don't always know the right way to say things. And so if someone says something inappropriate, to not come down on them, as well as accepting it within yourself, and making sure people can speak freely in meetings, and have opinions, and creating that safe space. Very, very, very important in all the work that we do. Okay. So the next discussion topic is, we've talked a little bit around culture change, and really this again promotes and moves forward access, equity, and inclusion. That's really the goal here. So I'll ask these individually. How does this benefit the institution as a whole? And I've touched upon this a little bit, but what are your thoughts out here? If we're increasing access, equity, and inclusion for students with unique abilities specifically, how does that impact the institution as a whole, before we talk about, the program and students? Any thoughts here?
Craig, this is Andrew Quigley. Can you hear me?
I can, Andrew. Thank you.
Yeah, this is Andrew Quigley at the University of Central Florida in the Inclusive Education Services program. And I can't use these words. because they are my coworkers' words, but she always talks about how 10 years from now, an individual that has one of our students in maybe their history class, they're going in to interview an individual, or maybe an individual, they're going into an interview and there's an individual that has a disability. They kind of go back to that college experience in that moment of that interaction that they interacted with that student in the class, and it kind of changes the whole mindset of that individual.
Absolutely. And that's the key point right there. You hit the nail right on the head, Andrew. Thank you so much for sharing that. And as I've said once before, diversity enriches our environment completely. So, not only will having having individuals interact with students with unique abilities impact them personally, but what happens after that is going to impact every person that person comes in contact with potentially. And that specific example speaks to that exactly. So thank you for that. Other thoughts there on the institution? Okay, so I think those are the key components, right? Well, I'm jumping ahead of myself. So let's just go to the program, which we're running a little bit out of time. So I think we talked about the program, but in turn, how does this impact the other students at the college? Students outside of our programs. When we increase inclusion and there's interaction with students with unique abilities, how does it help the students in similar ways that it helped that faculty member? I think the answer is kind of the same. First of all, it increases the understanding of what unique ability means, what intellectual disability means, because people come in with a stereotype, they come in with their thoughts. And once you interact with an individual, it just changes that completely. There's no way not to. I get inspired every time I come to one of these conferences or one of the TIPSA conferences, and we have the students speaking about their accomplishments. It continually changes me in the way that I view this. And this is exactly what it does for the other students. So we're actually providing opportunities for the other students to really grow, to really understand, how, that interacting with individuals with unique abilities is just interacting with individuals. And go ahead, Kathy.
I just want to share, Linda Musio also mentioned that she's heard professors say that the entire class was positively impacted by our students who are there. And I've read research, I've heard people speak about that as well, that it has enhanced the class, the course itself, by our individuals being in it. I think it's allowed an authenticity that may not have been there before in allowing people to be who they are. So I think Linda's point is very true, in that we really are seeing it from the professor's perspective as well as just the course itself.
Right, absolutely. Thank you, Kathy. And I think that wraps it up really well. And I know I'm running out of time here. So I really, this is the last piece I'll talk directly with. I have some slides on universal design for learning beyond this. Honestly, I put them in there in case we were able to get to that. Really, the focus I wanted to get here is the paradigm shift and the culture change. The universal design for learning, I think if you look at the slides I have in here and do your research with the key components of means of engagement, action and expression and representation, you'll be able to find a lot of information on there to assist with your programs. And that really is a presentation amongst itself. But the last piece I really wanted to get to was the virtual environment, and I was hoping to have a discussion about this and answer any questions about this, because the social model and shared responsibility is definitely applicable to remote learning, and I think we've seen that during our transition, and I think it's a great time to go back to really what the functional definition of accessibility is. providing the students an opportunity to acquire the same information, engage in same interaction, enjoy the same services as students without disabilities. And the key component is with substantial equivalent ease of use. So I just wanted to throw that operational definition out there because I just love the definition. You'll see the source that I got that from, which is also the source for my Universal Design for Learning slides. And I also shared that on Whova. I would really recommend that everybody go through that site if you want to learn more about Universal Design for Learning for UDL. It's just an amazing resource, and I use it all the time. So with our last couple minutes, are there any questions or comments specifically on the virtual environment and issues you've encountered, how you've resolved them, how you've assisted them? And I know for those of us with brand new programs, this would especially be helpful if anybody can share. Any thoughts about that? You're on mute, Drew. Uh-oh, maybe Drew can't get unmuted.
Hey, Craig. This is Amanda.
Hi, Amanda.
I was going to share Amanda's question. So Amanda, please go ahead.
Okay.
I was just trying to help someone else. Go ahead,
Oh,
Amanda.
sure, no worries. I guess I posted in the chat, but the position of ADA coordinator, how did that come to be, like at the college, or who funds that? Or I think the second time I've heard it, I know there's a presenter from Arizona who had that title when we were last in person. So just curious about that position, kind of
Yes.
outside the accessibility office.
Yeah. So every college is required to have someone identified as an ADA coordinator for the college. The difficulty we have with that is it's not very well defined. So if you were to go on your college and say, who's the ADA coordinator, there may not be an answer for that. And if you work in an accessibility resources office and you're the director of that program, and you were to ask who's that person, the answer could be it's you, and you don't even know it. So really what the ADA coordinator does is it's a person who basically is responsible for the accessibility of the institution. And this is what causes a lot of difficulty, because the accessibility of the institution includes physical accessibility, virtual accessibility, and we haven't done a good job of identifying that. And I think the reasoning behind that is we haven't had guidance from the states to really push that home. So it's a difficult situation. At Broward College, it was decided that I would become that person. And so I work very closely with human resources. I work very closely with facilities. I don't do that work, but I am there to make sure that I'm a part of any changes that happen, and things, like language in human resources, those things like that aren't always considered. Like, does it really need in a job description, does it say you need to be mobile? Or I'm sorry, you need to walk for X amount of times in a day. So right there, that excludes anyone in the wheelchair, right? Those are the kind of things that aren't normally thought of, and in the kinds of things that an ADA coordinator would approach. And what was the question about the Office of Accessibility, Amanda? You're a little choppy on that one.
Oh, sure. I guess I kind of answered my question, because we have the Student Accessibility Office. But I guess how or when, where is the ADA coordinator housed, which I guess it could be in any office as long as there's a defined person.
Yeah. And yeah, and that really is the problem. And that's nationwide. That's not an issue with Florida. You really see that throughout the nation, that there are not people who are really identified. But, for example, when I was in New York and we had a conversation about this, I was listed as the ADA coordinator and nobody ever told me I was the coordinator. And so I didn't have the skills to do it at that point. And I know that that's an issue on a lot of campuses. So I think I'm out of time, Drew. You
Our
know,
time is
so,
up.
yep. So, you know, I'd really like to thank everyone. And again, you know, just with the UDL slides, you know, please just take a look at them and look through the, look through the resources that I provided there. And really, I was just going to have a conversation around that, and maybe provide some suggestions, you know, on how we could utilize some of that within our programs. But I think you can get a lot of the information through those resources. And please feel free to email me, you know, any specific questions. And I thank you for the opportunity.
Craig, thank you so much for this timely and very informative and such an important aspect of programs with looking at the social model of disability. Thank you very much. Thank you all for joining us. This presentation has been recorded. The slides will be available on Whova as well as the recording. I think that you'll have access to Whova for a month. And so we'll have recordings posted on there sometime early next week. So thank you all, and we'll see you all in a planning session.
Thanks, everyone.